A routine patrol turned into the most dangerous mission of their lives. Soldiers descended into the ruined ruins and accidentally found a cache of gold bars hidden deep underground. But what began as an incredible find turned into a deadly ordeal. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you are watching from. The morning began the way so many others had since the campaign had dragged into its endless middle stretch. The sky above the ruined city was bleached with a pale, pitiless light, and the air tasted of dust and ash. Two soldiers walked side by side through streets that no longer deserved the name, their boots grinding over fragments of glass, twisted metal, and chunks of concrete that had once been walls, windows, or lives. They had been told it would be a routine patrol, just a sweep of the outskirts, a confirmation that the enemy had retreated further west. Yet both of them knew there was no such thing as routine out here. Every doorway was a mouth, every window a blind eye that might conceal a rifle barrel, and every shadow carried the memory of men who had vanished the moment they let themselves believe the silence was real. The soldier in front adjusted the strap of his rifle and glanced back at his partner, who trudged a step behind with the heavy gait of someone who had walked too many miles on too little sleep. Their equipment clinked softly with each movement, the sound strangely loud against the vast emptiness of the neighborhood. The radio clipped to his chest hissed and popped with static, a broken rhythm of noise that was supposed to be the lifeline connecting them to the rest of their unit. Occasionally a fragment of a voice cut through, only to dissolve again into incomprehensible crackles. It left them with a nagging sense of isolation, as though the city itself had swallowed them whole. Every patrol began with the same instructions: sweep the assigned blocks, report any sign of enemy presence, avoid unnecessary risk, and return to base before dark. The words were drilled into them, repeated until they became part of their thoughts. Yet on mornings like this they sounded hollow. The industrial quarter they were tasked to explore had been pounded mercilessly during the first weeks of the invasion. What stood now were the skeletons of warehouses and workshops, their roofs torn away like peeled tin lids, their interiors gutted by fire. Weeds had begun to creep through the cracks, indifferent to the charred remains of machines and the discarded belongings scattered like evidence of a hurried flight. The place felt less like a battlefield than a graveyard for an entire way of life. They moved carefully, eyes sweeping every angle. The taller of the two paused by a collapsed storefront, crouching low to scan the alley that opened beside it. His partner covered the rear, fingers tight on the trigger of his rifle, the weight of responsibility heavy in his chest. They did not speak. Conversation was dangerous. Even the faintest echo could carry too far in streets where walls bounced sound like drums. The silence between them was not hostility, but instinct, a bond forged by months of surviving on reflex and trust. They communicated with glances, nods, and the subtle shift of shoulders. As they pressed deeper, the signs of life grew stranger. A child's tricycle lay rusting against a wall, its front wheel twisted sideways. A pair of shoes, one larger than the other, were lined neatly by a doorway as though the family had meant to return. A thin curtain stirred in the shattered window of an apartment block, though there was no breeze. The soldiers exchanged a tense look and froze, weapons raised. Seconds passed, then minutes. Nothing moved. Finally, they lowered their rifles, but the feeling lingered, eyes watching from some hidden corner, breath held in silence. They continued onward. The road sloped gradually toward the heart of the district, where a massive warehouse loomed with its roof half caved in. The commanding officer had marked this place as their boundary point. Reach the warehouse, check its perimeter, and report back. On the map, it was just another square of gray among many, but up close it radiated menace. The steel ribs of its frame jutted into the air like broken bones. A rusted crane leaned precariously above the yard, frozen mid-swing as though time itself had stopped. The soldiers approached with deliberate caution, weaving between rusted vehicles and piles of rubble. The radio sputtered again. A burst of words flickered into life. Report! Coordinates! Hold position! But the rest drowned in static. The taller soldier tapped the side of the device, muttered under his breath, and tried to adjust the frequency. The hiss only grew louder, a harsh reminder that they were adrift beyond the reach of command. He raised the antenna higher, stepping onto a fallen beam, straining for any scrap of clarity. For a moment he thought he caught the commander's voice, then it vanished like smoke. He lowered the radio slowly, a grim expression on his face. They both knew what it meant. If something happened here, there would be no one to call. Fatigue pressed down heavier than their gear. Sweat soaked their uniforms despite the dry air, and the grime of weeks without proper rest clung to every seam. The younger soldier, the one who still held on to the fragments of discipline, kept telling himself to stay alert, to follow procedure, to remember the code drilled into him back in training. But the older, more cynical one carried an edge of bitterness. He muttered about wasted lives, about how the officers in their safe compounds never walked these streets, never felt the weight of silence pressing in. His partner listened without reply, but the words burrowed into him, unsettling, leaving questions he wished he could ignore. As they reached the side of the warehouse, they paused again to scan the surroundings. The entrance yawned wide, the doors torn from their hinges. Inside, shadows pooled thick and dark, a cavern of uncertainty. They knew they should clear it, yet something about the emptiness felt wrong, as though the building itself were holding its breath. The younger soldier motioned to move along the exterior instead, a wide circle to cover their assigned sector. The older one shrugged, agreeing wordlessly. Together they skirted the cracked pavement, stepping over coils of wire and fragments of steel. For hours the patrol dragged on in this manner. Silence, movement, observation, the occasional crackle of static. The sun climbed higher, bleaching the ruins in harsh white light, and the shadows shortened until they seemed to vanish. By midday, the heat shimmered visibly in the distance, warping the horizon like a mirage. Every corner looked the same, every block of rubble indistinguishable from the last. The city was a labyrinth designed to wear down body and spirit alike. Yet amid the monotony, there was an undercurrent of dread. Both soldiers felt it, though neither gave it voice. It was in the way birds never circled overhead, in the absence of stray dogs or even the scurrying of rats. It was in the oppressive stillness, as though the ruins themselves conspired to keep their secrets hidden. They knew from bitter experience that such quiet often preceded disaster. The longer it stretched unbroken, the sharper their nerves became. When they finally halted in the shade of a collapsed wall to drink from their canteens, the water tasted metallic, tinged with the dust that coated everything. They sat in silence, listening to the faint ticking of cooling metal in the wreckage. The younger soldier wiped his mouth and glanced at the radio again, its red light flickering weakly. He tried one more call, his voice low and steady, but the response was the same, static, nothing more. He set it down beside him, feeling the weight of isolation settle heavier than ever. The day was far from over. Their orders demanded a complete sweep, and until it was done, there would be no return. Rising reluctantly, they continued on, weaving deeper into the industrial quarter. The ruins seemed endless, each turn revealing another block of broken concrete, another empty shell of a building. Yet beneath the exhaustion, there was a strange pull, an instinct that whispered something waited for them ahead. They could not have said why, but every step carried the faint sense of being drawn toward a hidden destination. By the time they reached the far edge of the warehouse district, the sun had begun its slow descent, painting the sky with the dull glow of late afternoon. The streets narrowed into alleys where the debris lay thicker, forcing them to pick their way carefully through piles of stone and twisted rebar. It was here, amid the tangle of wreckage and silence, that they first noticed the ground was not as solid as it seemed. A faint depression in the earth caught their attention, subtle but undeniable, as though the surface had given way above something hollow. They exchanged a look, weary but alert, and moved closer. The day that had begun as just another routine patrol was about to shift, though neither of them could yet imagine how completely it would alter the course of their lives. The city had been silent too long, and now it seemed ready to reveal one of its oldest secrets. The uneven ground stretched before them like a wound in the earth, a shallow depression where rubble had shifted in on itself, leaving a dark cavity framed by twisted steel and broken slabs of concrete. The two soldiers halted instinctively, their eyes sweeping the surroundings, listening for anything that might betray an ambush. The silence held steady, oppressive and absolute, But the shape in the earth was undeniable. What had first appeared to be just another pocket of destruction carried a different quality, a geometric symmetry beneath the chaos, as though it was not a simple crater from shelling, but something man-made that had been exposed after the bombing. They approached slowly, rifles at the ready, their movements cautious, every step deliberate. The air was heavy with the dry scent of dust, but beneath it lingered a damp, metallic odor that seemed out of place in the sun-scorched ruins. When they reached the edge of the depression, they peered inside. A jagged hole opened where the ground had caved in, its edges lined with broken bricks and bent rebar. It was not deep, but dark enough to conceal what lay beneath. The younger soldier knelt and brushed the dirt from a corner of exposed masonry. The texture was smooth concrete, not the rough mix of rubble that surrounded it. A deliberate structure lay hidden here, something constructed long before the war tore the city apart. For a moment they hesitated, weighing the risk. Entering an unknown underground space could mean anything: a collapsed sewer, a booby trap, or worse, an enemy hideout. Yet the compulsion to know pressed harder than caution. This war had taught them that chance discoveries often rewrote the mission. The older soldier muttered a quiet curse under his breath, then slung his rifle over his shoulder, crouched, and lowered himself into the hole. His partner followed, the scrape of boots against stone echoing faintly. They landed on a narrow ledge, and from there a short descent led them deeper. Inside, the light from above thinned quickly, leaving shadows that seemed to thicken with each step. Their flashlights cut pale beams across the walls, revealing rough concrete reinforced with steel rods. This was no natural cavity, no random ruin. They were inside some kind of substructure deliberately buried beneath the warehouse district. The younger soldier ran his hand across the surface, feeling the chill of stone untouched by sunlight for decades. The passage sloped downward, ending in a small landing where a rusted metal ladder clung precariously to the wall. It descended into a deeper chamber, its bottom lost in shadow. They exchanged a glance, each seeing the same apprehension mirrored in the other's face. With the radio dead, there would be no quick reinforcement if something went wrong. They were on their own. Yet retreating was not an option either, not when they had come this far. The older soldier tested the ladder, tugging on its corroded rungs. It groaned but held. Slowly he began to climb, the beam of his flashlight swaying across the darkness below. The younger one followed, gripping the cold metal tightly as flakes of rust crumbled beneath his fingers. Their descent felt interminable, each footstep a hollow clang swallowed by the silence. Finally their boots struck solid ground, and the echo reverberated like a drumbeat in a tomb. The chamber around them stretched wider than they expected. Their flashlights swept over piles of debris, broken crates, and coils of abandoned wire. The air smelled of oil and mildew, thick with decades of neglect. They moved cautiously, rifles raised again, their beams slicing through the black. Then they saw it, a door. Not the fragile wood of a basement or the flimsy sheet metal of a storage shed, but a massive slab of steel bolted into a reinforced frame. It stood half-hidden behind collapsed concrete, its surface streaked with rust yet intact. They froze, the sight heavy with implication. Who had built this, and why? The door bore no insignia they could read, just faded stenciled numbers almost erased by time. Its handle was fused in place, a block of corrosion that looked immovable. The younger soldier stepped closer, pressing his ear against the cold surface, as though expecting to hear movement beyond. But there was only silence. They studied the surroundings more closely, searching for clues. The walls leading to the door had been reinforced thicker than elsewhere, as though to withstand not just decay, but deliberate force. Dust lay heavy in every corner, disturbed only by their arrival. This place had been sealed and forgotten, yet the collapse above had opened a path, and now the decision lay squarely in their hands. The older soldier set his rifle aside long enough to grip the corroded wheel on the door. He strained against it, muscles taut, teeth clenched. The metal resisted stubbornly, then gave a grudging creak that echoed through the chamber. Together they pressed, twisting, heaving, until with a final shudder the wheel broke free. The door shifted slightly inward, releasing a gust of stale, bitter air that carried the weight of years. They pulled harder, forcing the heavy barrier open just enough to slip through. Beyond it stretched another corridor, narrower and lower, lined with pipes and conduits running along the ceiling. Their flashlights revealed dust so thick it curled into patterns like frost on a window pane. A sense of intrusion settled on them, as though they were stepping into a place deliberately concealed, never meant to be rediscovered. They moved slowly, their footsteps muffled on the concrete floor, their breathing amplified in the confined space. The corridor ended at another obstruction, but this time not a sealed door. Instead, rubble from above had spilled downward, blocking most of the passage. They squeezed through a gap, scraping against jagged edges, until they emerged into a broader room. Here the air felt heavier, and the sound of dripping water echoed faintly. Their lights flickered across the space, revealing the outlines of large shapes containers, or perhaps machinery, lined in rows. The soldiers stood still, their senses heightened, hearts pounding with the recognition that they had stumbled onto something far greater than a collapsed basement. This was deliberate, secret, built with care and hidden beneath layers of stone. Whatever purpose it once served was long forgotten, but the magnitude of its construction suggested importance. They exchanged no words, only the silent acknowledgement that they were about to unearth a secret buried by war and time alike. And in that silence, broken only by the drip of unseen water, they knew that their patrol had shifted beyond the ordinary forever. What had begun as a routine sweep of ruins had led them into the mouth of a secret that would test not only their courage, but their very souls. The warehouse above was already fading from their thoughts, replaced by the question of what this subterranean vault was meant to guard. The answer lay only a door or two away, and the pull of discovery was stronger than any fear of consequence. The room they had entered seemed vast and low, its ceiling supported by thick concrete pillars that rose from the ground like the trunks of ancient trees. Their flashlights cut through the darkness in trembling beams, sweeping across long rows of shapes that filled the chamber. At first, the soldiers thought they were looking at abandoned machinery, perhaps forgotten vehicles or rusting generators. But as they drew closer, the outlines became clearer. Heavy metal crates stacked too high, their lids bolted shut, their surfaces scarred with age and damp. Dust hung in the air like a veil, disturbed only by their footsteps, and each step echoed too loudly, as though they were intruders trespassing in a place meant to remain untouched. The younger soldier approached one of the crates and crouched, brushing his hand across the corroded markings stenciled on its side. The paint had faded to near invisibility, but faint numbers and symbols could still be traced beneath the grime. They were not in any language he immediately recognized, though the structure of the letters hinted at military origin. The older soldier circled the stack, his beam of light glancing off dozens more containers, all uniform, all sealed. The sheer number made his throat tighten. There were hundreds of them, lined in neat order, as if they had been placed with meticulous care and then buried away. For a long moment they simply stared, trying to comprehend the scale of what they were seeing. This was no forgotten storeroom or abandoned depot. This was something deliberate, constructed and concealed. Their nerves screamed caution mines, traps, the possibility that this was all a decoy meant to lure, but curiosity gnawed harder. The older soldier pulled a combat knife from his belt and wedged it into the seam of a crate's lid. He pried, the metal shrieking softly as it resisted. His partner added his strength, using a length of rusted rebar as leverage. With a final groan, the bolts gave, and the lid shifted open. The smell that escaped was strange, not rot or mildew, but the sharp tang of oil and cloth aged to brittleness. Inside, neat rows of rectangular forms lay stacked with precision, each one wrapped in waxed canvas and bound with twine. The younger soldier reached in and tugged at the wrapping of the nearest object. The fabric tore reluctantly, revealing beneath it a glimmer that their flashlights caught at once. The reflection was muted at first, a dull sheen, then it burst into a glow of unmistakable richness. Gold. A bar of gold, heavy, gleaming even in the dim light, its surface stamped with a mint mark that neither man had ever seen before. For several seconds, neither of them breathed. The bar sat in his palm like a living thing, its weight undeniable, its promise overwhelming. The older soldier took it, hefted it, then replaced it with reverence as though afraid of being burned. They turned their lights back into the crate and saw more of the same dozens of bars stacked tightly, their edges gleaming faintly where the cloth had frayed. The realization settled on them with a force that was almost physical. They had not found weapons or ammunition, or even forgotten rations. They had uncovered a fortune, an unimaginable treasure sealed away beneath the earth. Moving quickly now, driven by adrenaline, they opened a second crate. It held the same, bars upon bars, each one pristine beneath its wrapper, untouched by time. A third crate revealed the same pattern. The chamber was filled with them, row upon row, stretching back into the darkness. The soldiers exchanged a look, their faces pale in the glow of their flashlights. Whatever this was, it had been hidden with deliberate secrecy. This was no small cache looted from a bank. This was a reserve, the kind of hoard governments guarded, the kind that nations went to war to protect. The younger soldier tried the radio again, his hands shaking. The device sputtered and hissed, the red light blinking weakly. A burst of static rattled, then fell silent. He tried another frequency, then another, but nothing came back. The walls of the chamber were too thick, or the damage above too severe. They were cut off entirely. No one at base knew what they had found. No one would know unless they carried word back themselves. The implications pressed heavily on them both. Alone in the belly of a ruined city, they were standing amid wealth so great it could alter the fate of entire governments. The younger soldier struggled to wrap his mind around it. He thought of his family far away, of the endless debt, the struggle to build a future when war consumed everything. A single bar would change all of that. 10 would secure a life beyond imagining, and here were thousands, stacked like bricks, waiting in silence. The older soldier's thoughts ran darker. He had long since abandoned faith in officers or politics. To him, this was proof of the corruption he always suspected, that the war was not about freedom or justice, but about control of resources. Hidden fortunes moved and concealed while men like him bled in the dust. They began to explore further into the chamber, their beams illuminating more crates. Some fallen open, others collapsed beneath the weight of years. Wherever they looked, gold gleamed back at them, the dull yet undeniable brilliance of permanence. Time had not corroded it. War had not consumed it. It had waited here, patient and eternal, for someone to find it. And now it had. The air grew heavy with the scent of their own sweat, the pounding of their hearts loud in their ears. The chamber felt alive, oppressive, as though the treasure itself radiated a kind of weight that bent their will. They spoke little, but the silence between them changed. It was no longer the professional quiet of soldiers on patrol. It was the strained silence of men who both understood that they were staring at temptation too powerful to ignore. The younger soldier finally broke away, pacing toward the far wall where an iron door sat ajar. He pushed it with his boot and found another corridor beyond, this one even narrower, lined with more crates and stacks of barrels. Inside the barrels lay bundles wrapped in cloth, and when he cut one open with his knife, coins spilled out, clattering across the floor. Gold coins, dull with age but still shining. He dropped to his knees, gathering a handful, the sound of them ringing in the silence like laughter. His partner stood motionless, his face hidden in shadow. For a long moment, the older soldier said nothing, only watched. Then he spoke in a voice low and harsh, reminding his companion that they were cut off, without backup, with the sun sinking above ground. Every second spent here was another second they risked being discovered, trapped, or worse. Yet his own eyes lingered on the crates, and his fists clenched at his sides. The radio gave one final hiss and died completely, its light winking out. The silence that followed was absolute. No command, no orders, no connection to the outside world. Only the two of them, the echo of dripping water, and the impossible wealth stretching in every direction. The chamber seemed to close in on them, pressing its secret into their bones. They were soldiers, yes, but now they were also witnesses to something far greater than their mission. A decision would have to be made: report this, or hide it, or take what they could carry. The gold lay waiting, silent and eternal, indifferent to their struggle. And as they stood among it, breathing heavily, hearts pounding, each man realized that nothing about their lives would ever be the same again. The discovery of the treasure weighed upon them like a physical burden, even though they had not yet lifted a single bar into their packs. The silence of the underground chamber pressed in closer now, not as the emptiness of forgotten ruins, but as a suffocating presence, as though the gold itself demanded an answer. The two soldiers stood among the crates, their flashlights trembling slightly in their hands, and tried to breathe through the dust and the heat. Neither wanted to speak first, but both knew that silence could not last. The radio was dead, the air was thick, and the weight of a decision loomed larger with every heartbeat. The younger soldier set his light down on one of the crates, its beam angled across the open bars that glowed dully like embers in the half-light. His hands were still trembling from the shock of discovery. In his mind, he saw his family again, the small house on the edge of a forgotten town, the tired face of his mother who had worked herself thin just to keep food on the table. He thought of the letters he carried folded in his breast pocket, written by his younger sister, her childish handwriting describing school days and small hopes. All of it seemed so far away, but in that moment, the image burned clear. A single bar of the gold before him would change everything for them. A single bar would erase debt, bring security, open a door to a future he could barely imagine. He felt dizzy thinking about it, his chest tight with the enormity of what lay at his fingertips. The older soldier was watching him closely, his eyes narrowed, his jaw locked. He had seen this kind of temptation before, not in gold perhaps, but in the battlefield decisions that tore men apart from within. He leaned against a pillar, his rifle slung across his chest, and let his thoughts swirl darkly. He had fought too long, bled too often, only to watch the high command grow fatter and more arrogant with every passing year. He had no illusions about what would happen if they reported this discovery honestly. The officers would descend like vultures, sealing off the chamber, erasing all trace, and the gold would vanish into channels where no soldier's hand would ever touch it again. Not one bar would ever find its way to the families who needed it. Not 1 ounce would ease the burden of the men dying in the dust. He told himself this with bitterness, yet even as the thought formed, another followed behind it. Why should he not be the one to benefit? Why should he not take a piece of what had been hidden by liars and cowards? Their eyes met across the gloom, and though neither spoke aloud, the tension thickened until it felt like a third presence in the room. The younger one broke first, his voice low, trembling, almost reverent. He spoke of duty, of the necessity of obeying orders, of the danger of even thinking about betrayal. But his words lacked conviction, and the older soldier could hear it. Beneath the recitation of training manuals and codes of conduct, there was longing, desperate and raw. The younger man wanted the gold just as much as he did. The difference was that he was still clinging to the illusion of righteousness, still hoping there was a way to reconcile both desire and honor. The older soldier stepped closer to one of the crates, reached in, and pulled out a bar wrapped in its stained canvas. He held it in his hands, feeling its immense weight, letting the beam of his flashlight roll across its gleaming surface. He spoke slowly, his voice hard, explaining the futility of sacrifice when the spoils always went elsewhere. He reminded the younger soldier of the endless missions, the friends buried in shallow graves, the broken promises of men in uniforms far cleaner than theirs. Did he truly believe, the older one asked, that reporting this would change anything? Did he believe they would even be remembered for the discovery? Or would their names vanish like the static of their dead radio, swallowed by bureaucracy and greed? The younger soldier faltered. His heart told him to cling to the oath, to the uniform, to the ideals he had carried into war. But his mind was clouded with the dazzling vision of a different life. He pictured the bars stacked in his pack, heavy but manageable, and the thought thrilled and terrified him. He felt ashamed for imagining it, but the shame was weak compared to the hunger. And in the eyes of his companion, he saw no judgment, only a reflection of his own turmoil. They spoke in fragments after that, their voices hushed though there was no one to hear. One argued for caution, the other for seizing opportunity, but neither truly dismissed the other's words. The chamber seemed to listen with them, the gold glinting in mute agreement that it was too much to resist. Each man imagined carrying the bars through the ruined streets, each step a test of will, each shadow a potential enemy. They knew the risks, but they could not turn away from the thought. It grew stronger with every passing minute. Eventually, the older soldier broke the stalemate by slipping a bar into his pack. The sound of it settling inside echoed louder than a gunshot in the younger man's ears. He felt his stomach twist, but his hands moved of their own accord, reaching into the crate, lifting another, and tucking it into his own gear. The weight was incredible, dragging at his shoulders, but it also filled him with a strange surge of power. They exchanged a look then, both guilty and complicit, bound together by the secret act. Still, the chamber pressed its silence upon them, reminding them that they could not stay. Already the air felt thinner, their flashlights dimmer, their nerves more frayed. Above ground, the sun was sinking, and the city was not empty. Enemies lurked in alleys, mines waited beneath the soil, and the night belonged to those who knew its shadows. The soldiers knew they would have to move soon, but the decision had been made. They would not leave empty-handed. As they prepared to ascend the ladder back to the surface, the younger soldier paused, casting one last look at the vast rows of crates stretching into darkness. It seemed impossible to leave so much behind, impossible to walk away, knowing that such a fortune still lay hidden. But he forced himself to turn, shouldering his pack, his body sagging beneath its new burden. The older soldier gave a final tug on the door, sealing it as best he could, as though hiding their crime from the stone itself. Then they climbed upward, step by step, the echoes of their ascent swallowed by the chamber's eternal silence. When they emerged back into the broken light of the ruined warehouse, the sky had darkened to a bruised gray, the air cooling with the onset of evening. The city looked no different than before, yet to them it was transformed. Every shadow seemed sharper, every sound more sinister, every street more dangerous. They carried not only their weapons and their gear, but also the crushing weight of temptation and secrecy. Each man knew without saying that their bond had changed. They were no longer just soldiers on patrol. They were keepers of a secret that could never be spoken aloud, a secret that would test their loyalty to each other and to themselves with every step they took. The gold had awakened something within them both, something that could not be set aside. And as they moved cautiously through the ruins, searching for the path back to base, the unspoken question gnawed at them with relentless hunger. Would they make it back alive? And if they did, what would they do with the treasure they carried? The war was still raging above ground, but beneath it, in their hearts, another war had already begun. The air above ground felt cooler than the suffocating heat of the chamber below. Yet it did nothing to ease the weight pressing down on their shoulders. The packs on their backs, once heavy with standard supplies, now bore an almost unbearable burden. Each gold bar pulled them down like a stone in deep water, and though neither soldier spoke of it, both could feel the difference in every step. The ruined city spread out before them in silence, the broken warehouse hulking behind, like the tomb of some ancient king. Evening shadows stretched long across the cracked pavement, and the dying light painted everything in shades of rust and ash. The soldiers adjusted their gear, checked their weapons, and began the slow march back toward base. From the very first steps, the city felt change. Where before it had been a maze of ruins and silence, now it seemed alive with menace. Every broken window became a watching eye, every alley a mouth waiting to swallow them whole. The gold had not only altered their thoughts, but had sharpened their fear. They moved cautiously, pausing often to listen, though the only sounds were their own labored breaths and the faint scrape of metal bars shifting in their packs. The younger soldier felt sweat soaking through his shirt despite the cooling air. His muscles screamed with each motion, his legs trembling under the strain. He knew his partner was suffering the same, though the older soldier gave no sign, pushing forward with the grim determination of one who had long ago learned to endure pain without complaint. The first sign of danger came when they reached the edge of the district. In the soft dirt between the rubble, the older soldier spotted a trail of footprints, fresh, clear, and leading toward the very path they needed to take. He crouched low, running a hand over the impression, noting the crisp edges that had not yet been eroded by wind. He looked at his companion, and no words were needed. Others had passed here recently in not friendly patrols. They tightened their grips on their rifles and pressed on, nerves straining like taut wires. The alleys narrowed as they moved deeper into the ruins, forcing them to walk in single file. The oppressive silence grew unbearable. Once or twice the younger soldier thought he heard faint noises ahead, scraping, the shuffle of debris. But when they halted to listen, the world returned to stillness. His imagination twisted every sound into danger, every shadow into an ambush. The pack on his back felt heavier with each pause, as if the gold itself was dragging him toward the ground. He wondered if the enemy could hear the faint clinking of metal when he shifted his weight, wondered if the treasure was betraying them by its very presence. As darkness thickened, they reached a stretch of open ground littered with jagged metal and shattered stone. They had crossed such spaces before, but now the air bristled with unseen threat. The older soldier raised a hand, signaling caution. He pointed to the dirt, where faint metallic discs glimmered under the dying light. Mines. They had wandered into a forgotten field, laid who knew how long ago. A careless step here could turn the night into fire and ruin. The soldiers froze, hearts pounding. Carefully, methodically, they began to pick their way forward. Each step was tested with the barrel of a knife or the butt of a rifle, probing the earth before committing their weight. Their breathing grew shallow, their movements agonizingly slow. The packs dragged them off balance, threatening to topple them into disaster with every shift. The younger soldier's hands trembled as he eased his foot down onto a patch of dirt that seemed clear, only to feel it sink slightly, the ground softer than expected. Panic surged, but he forced himself still, sweat pouring down his face. The older soldier crouched beside him, whispering calm instructions, guiding him back an inch at a time until the tension in the soil eased. They continued like this for what felt like hours, each step a battle against death. When at last they cleared the field, their legs shook with exhaustion. The younger soldier wanted to collapse, to lay the pack down and breathe freely again, but the older one urged him onward. They could not rest here. The enemy was too close. And indeed, before long, the sound of voices carried faintly on the wind, foreign words, laughter, the clatter of weapons. The soldiers ducked into the shadows of a ruined wall, crouching low as a group of armed men passed not far away. Through a crack in the rubble, they glimpsed silhouettes against the fading sky, rifles slung casually, their posture relaxed in territory they believed deserted. The two soldiers held their breath as the patrol moved past, the sound of boots crunching on stone echoing unnervingly loud. One of the men paused, looking around as though sensing something, but after a moment he spat into the dust and continued on. The danger ebbed only when the voices faded into distance. The younger soldier let out his breath in a shaky exhale, his nerves stretched beyond measure. The older soldier only gave him a hard look, a reminder that the night was far from over. They resumed their trek, but now the city seemed to close in around them. Every turn presented new obstacles, collapsed streets, walls leaning precariously, fires still smoldering in distant ruins. The gold weighed them down, forcing them to move slower than they wished. Twice they considered abandoning some of the bars to move faster, but neither could bring himself to part with even a single piece. Each bar had become more than metal. It was hope, vengeance, redemption. To leave it behind would be to betray the suffering that had brought them here. As midnight approached, fatigue pressed on them like a vice. Their legs dragged, their eyes burned, and hunger gnawed at their bellies. Yet worse than exhaustion was the constant fear. At every corner they expected an ambush, at every shadow the glint of an enemy rifle. The city was alive with ghosts, the weight of war clinging to every stone. The younger soldier began to stumble, his pack dragging him sideways. The older one caught him, steadying him with a rough grip, forcing him upright. They pressed on, but the younger man knew his strength was fading. Their fears became reality when the crack of a rifle split the night. A bullet struck the wall beside them, sending shards of stone into the air. Instinct drove them to the ground, returning fire toward the muzzle flash in the distance. The night erupted into chaos, the silence shattered by gunfire echoing through the ruins. The younger soldier fired blindly, adrenaline surging, while the older one picked his shots carefully, his experience steadying his hand. The enemy pressed closer, shouts filling the darkness, the bark of orders carrying through the alleys. The soldiers fought desperately, their packs dragging them down, their movements sluggish under the crushing weight of the gold. Each shot felt slower, each dodge clumsier. The younger soldier felt a bullet tear through his sleeve, burning his skin but sparing his flesh. The older one pulled him behind cover, reloading quickly, eyes scanning for an escape. They were outnumbered, pinned, and burdened. The choice pressed on them like the finger of fate. Abandon the gold and run, or cling to it and risk annihilation. The firefight dragged on, the echoes bouncing endlessly in the maze of ruins. At last a lull came, the enemy withdrawing slightly, perhaps regrouping. The soldiers seized the chance, darting through a narrow alley, their boots slipping on loose stone, their lungs burning. They did not stop until they reached a collapsed building that offered shelter. Inside the ruins, they crouched in the darkness, gasping for breath. The packs pressed hard into their spines, unforgiving, relentless. The younger soldier bent forward, head in hands, trembling with exhaustion and fear. He wanted to scream, to tear the gold from his back and leave it where it fell. But when his fingers touched the straps, he could not bring himself to release them. The thought of walking away empty-handed after all they had endured was unbearable. He looked at his partner, hoping to see some sign of surrender, but the older soldier's eyes burned with the same fire. They would not abandon the treasure. Not yet. The night dragged on, each moment a battle against the city, the enemy, and their own faltering strength. They stumbled forward, step by step, driven less by discipline than by obsession. Every ounce of the gold weighed on them like judgment, but neither would yield. They told themselves they could endure, that they could reach the base, that survival and fortune could both be theirs. But deep within, both knew the truth. They were caught in a snare of their own making, trapped between greed and survival, and the way back would demand a price they might not be able to pay. The ruins pressed close around them, the city whispering with shadows that seemed to move when they turned their heads. Hours of creeping, fighting, stumbling, and dragging the weight of their new burden had eroded the last of their strength. The younger soldier's legs shook beneath him, as if the ground itself conspired to pull him down, while the older one forced himself forward with sheer will, his body long since numb to exhaustion. Their packs were anchors that dragged them closer to collapse, but neither let go. The thought of leaving even a single bar behind clawed at their minds like betrayal. They had come too far, risked too much. To abandon the treasure now felt impossible, yet the city did not relent. Each block seemed longer than the last, every alley tighter, the silence broken by sudden noises that turned their blood cold. Once they heard the echo of boots on stone, the harsh laughter of armed men somewhere nearby. Another time, the faint metallic clatter of a rifle being loaded drifted from the dark. The enemy was still out there, circling, waiting. Each sound reminded them that survival hung on the thinnest thread, and each step reminded them that the weight they carried might be the blade that severed it. When dawn began to creep across the horizon, painting the shattered skyline in pale orange, they were less than a mile from their own lines. The thought of safety so close should have filled them with relief, but instead it brought new fear. The younger soldier glanced at his companion and whispered the truth. Neither had spoken. What would happen when they returned? What would happen when the officers saw the gold? He imagined the treasure stripped from their hands, erased into the ledgers of men who would never set foot in these ruins. He imagined their discovery silenced, their voices lost, perhaps even their lives quietly extinguished to keep the secret. The older soldier's silence was answer enough. His eyes were grim, hard, and filled with a determination that frightened more than reassured. They pressed on into the gray light, slipping between gutted buildings, their boots stirring ash and dust. That was when the ambush came. A burst of gunfire split the morning, tearing through the wall just above their heads. The soldiers dove for cover, bullets sparking against stone, the roar of rifles filling the air. The enemy had found them, perhaps had been tracking them since the night. Shapes darted between shadows, their movements quick and ruthless. The younger soldier's heart pounded as he fired blindly, his hands trembling. The older one shouted orders over the chaos, his voice a low growl, steady even as bullets sang around them. They returned fire, darting from cover to cover, but the enemy pressed hard, their numbers greater, their advantage growing with every shot. The soldiers' packs dragged them down, slowing their movements, making them clumsy. Twice the younger one nearly fell, the weight pulling him sideways, bullets snapping through the air where he had stood a heartbeat before. The gold had become a curse, chaining them to the ground as death closed in. The fight reached its breaking point in a collapsed courtyard where they found themselves cornered. The enemy had flanked them, cutting off escape. The older soldier scanned the scene quickly, his breath harsh, his body trembling with the effort of battle. Then his eyes fixed on his companion. In that instant, without words, the decision was made. He shoved the younger soldier hard, forcing him toward a gap in the rubble. A burst of gunfire rattled past, but the path beyond was clear for the moment. The younger one turned, shouting in protest, but the older soldier's expression was final. He had chosen. With a grim determination, the older soldier lifted his rifle and stepped into the open, drawing fire toward himself. His shots cracked sharply, deliberate and precise, cutting down two of the attackers before they could react. Bullets tore into the walls around him, striking his body, yet he stood firm, forcing the enemy to focus entirely on him. Behind the cover of his sacrifice, the younger soldier hesitated only a moment longer before survival drove him forward. He crawled through the gap, stumbling into the alley beyond, his breath ragged, his eyes burning with tears he could not stop. The sound of gunfire roared behind him, echoing like thunder in the ruins. Then came silence. He did not look back. He could not. His legs carried him forward through alleys and across broken streets. Each step a torment, each breath a battle. The pack on his back felt heavier than ever, as though the bars inside had absorbed the weight of his grief. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that stretched like accusing fingers across his path. At last he stumbled into the outer perimeter of his own lines, the faint sight of flags fluttering weakly in the breeze. Soldiers moved toward him, shouting, but their words blurred in his ears. He collapsed onto the ground, clutching his rifle in one hand and the straps of his pack in the other, refusing to release them even as darkness swam across his vision. When he woke, he was in a tent, the canvas glowing dimly with filtered sunlight. Medics moved around him, their voices hushed, their hands checking his wounds. His pack had been set aside and already officers were gathering near it, their eyes sharp, their expressions unreadable. He tried to speak, to explain, to tell them what had been found beneath the ruins, but the words caught in his throat. He saw one officer lift the flap of his pack, glimpse the glint of gold within, and then the flap was shut again, quickly, decisively. The officer's eyes met his, and in that gaze the younger soldier saw everything. Secrecy, greed, calculation. The fate of the treasure was sealed. He lay back against the cot, the weight of exhaustion pulling him down. His comrade was gone, his sacrifice etched forever into the silence of the ruins. The gold remained, but now it was no longer treasure. It was a burden heavier than any pack, a shadow that would haunt him no matter how long he lived. He could still feel it pressing against his back, dragging him toward the earth, reminding him of every step, every choice, every loss. The war raged on outside, but inside him, another war had been fought and lost. He had returned alive, but he could not say he had returned whole. The gold had tested him, broken him, and left him with a question that would never leave. Was survival worth the price he had paid? The officers spoke in hushed tones, their eyes always returning to the pack, their hands already arranging its disappearance into channels he would never see. He closed his eyes, unable to watch. The patrol had begun as routine, a simple mission through silent streets. It had ended in betrayal, sacrifice, and a treasure that promised only ruin. The younger soldier lay in the dim light, listening to the muffled sounds of war outside, and knew that though he had survived, the gold would never release him. It was no longer metal, no longer wealth. It was a curse, one he would carry forever, heavier than the heaviest pack, heavier than death itself. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what comes next. Watch our other videos for even more unbelievable stories and share this one with your friends. They won't believe it until they see it.